Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Spill the Tea with Mr. Narva. Today I have a really interesting video for all of you. It's interesting in such a way that I'm going to be addressing all 4 of my classes so that I can give you guys any extra help on information that you need. So this video is going to be split into actually 6 parts, but specifically there's going to be 4 different sections for each class. Now, I don't expect you guys to watch the video all the way through, so if you look in the comments below, you can figure out where and what time your class video portion starts, so you can go through and just listen to me talk about kind of what we're doing in class and give you some extra information. Now, before I do that, I'm going to also kind of wrap in a recommendation Wednesday into this video. So, for this week, I think I'm going to recommend a movie for you guys. I recently watched this really great movie called Knives Out. It's a whodunit movie, which basically just means that someone was murdered. There are multiple people who could be the murderers, and there is usually an investigator who is trying to figure it out, and he's like a specialty investigator who works like miracle cases. And that very much follows that same idea throughout this movie. The premise behind it being a grandfather and father of a huge family who's also famous and rich from writing murder mystery novels has found himself to be killed up in his attic office thing. And they don't know who did it. So all they know is that the night before he died, there was a gigantic party that he threw for his family, and from that party his family was very much disappointed with him because he was doing things like cutting them off or firing them from his company, and so they all have motive why to kill their grandfather, but I don't think anyone has guessed the ending yet. I know I went and saw it in theaters with a friend, and we did not guess that that was how it was going to end. So I highly recommend it. It'll definitely kind of keep you on your toes and keep you guessing until the very end. It is not a very serious movie. It is actually quite funny. There's this whole bit where one of the main characters, who is his nurse, cannot lie without throwing up. And so every single time she's answering questions, she's having to try and figure out ways to get around the questions without lying. And when she does lie, she legitimately throws up, and it is so funny. So definitely give it a watch. You can find it on Amazon Prime. It's not on Netflix yet, but I bet it will be. Yeah, highly recommend that movie. Check it out. Wow, that was a really long intro. So all right, well, let's get started. I'm going to talk to you guys about all of your different classes here. I'm going to go in this order. We're going to talk about creative writing, then we're going to talk about word study, and then ACT prep, and I'm going to save English for last because English is going to be the longest one. Yeah, so alright. Here's the tea. Okay, so let's start with creative writing. To begin, I want to share a little haiku that I wrote for you guys 2 minutes before I started recording this video. I hope you guys like it. No insanity, driven by morality to record all things. Now that we got the cringy poem writing out of the way, let's talk about what this week kind of holds for you guys and where I'm going with the current assignments that I've been giving to you guys. I think one major aspect that makes living through weird times like this pandemic so interesting is everything that comes out of these times. So what I'm talking about is the art, the paintings, the writings, the nowadays, I guess, digital videos, literally anything that comes out that records the troubles and the, I guess, the experiences of people who lived through these times. And that's incredibly important because the people who come after us, who may not be living through times such as war or through a pandemic or anything like that, they don't know what that's like. I would venture to argue that up until now, a lot of you guys didn't know what that was like. Even I didn't exactly know what it was like to live in a time of uncertainty. The only experience I have that's even been close to this is 9/11, and even then I was only in 3rd grade and I didn't feel the same effects as maybe my parents did. So this is something really big that as an adult I'm going through for the first time, and as teenagers you guys are going through for the first time. So it's important that we are finding ways to record our thoughts and our feelings and our hopes and our dreams during these times, and even our fears, you know, because how else are we going to share these experiences if we don't do something to record them as it's happening, right? So like I said in the assignment, instead of giving you guys a big fancy creative writing project to work on, I've decided to cancel the fan fiction section of our class, and instead we're going to recap and come back on the journaling section of our class. So I've assigned you guys 5 journal entries a week. I want you guys to record what's going on in your lives, what are you hearing in the news, just what are your true feelings and ideas and thoughts as we are stuck at home because of the social distancing aspect that's going on right now. Be real with it. You don't have to use super fancy language. You don't have to be very creative with your language unless you want to, okay? I want to hear the real you in these journal entries. And I don't know what we're going to do with these at this point. We might not do anything with them, or we might compile them together as something for society. A comment on what it's like for teenagers who are in their senior, junior, and sophomore years to go through a time like this, because I guarantee you guys have a different perspective that we adults don't have. We all have our own perspectives, but I think that your guys' perspective, the teenagers who went to spring break and then never came back, at least yet, have an interesting way of telling this story. Now, aside from that, also, it's actually just a great therapeutic thing to do. It'll keep you in good mental health. It'll give you some sort of structure that you can do each day. I know you guys know about that when we've talked about journals before. Yeah, so just keep up with those. Do one a day, 20 to 30 minutes of journaling. You can have Netflix on while you're doing it and just record what's going down in your life, you know? It'll help you more than you think, and it'll kind of keep me in touch with how you guys are doing. I will keep you up to date with what we're truly going to do with these after the fact, but at this point in time, just strive to keep up. Turn in at least one to me a week so that I know that you guys have done at least something in regards to journaling and keeping up with these times. And I just wouldn't be a fabulous teacher if I didn't give you guys an example of someone who's already done this. So I know that I left a link for a video about Anne Frank in our assignment. In that assignment, I want you guys to go and watch that video, because the story of Anne Frank, while it is tragic and incredibly sad, it is also so inspirational, and she truly is one of my heroes. To give you a recap, Anne Frank was a 13-year-old Jewish girl who lived in Germany at the time that Hitler and the Nazis came into power. They knew of some of the major issues that were going on in Germany and that they were in danger, so they went and hid up into what they call the secret annex, which was just kind of like an apartment that was up on like this top floor of this building. The only way to get up there was a door. They put a bookcase in front of the door so that no one knew that they were up there, and they just were going to try and wait it out as other attempts to flee the country proved to be unsuccessful for them. They were given supplies and food from friends who knew that they were up there, and eventually they were found, and it didn't end well for any of them really, except for one. The dad was the only survivor. But truly what came out of it was these diary pages by 13-year-old Anne Frank. And in her diary pages, she records so many messages of hope and kindness and truths about the world that were truly just beyond her time for a 13-year-old girl. And these diary entries have been recorded in all different language and have billions and billions of copies of it worldwide. We even teach it in our curriculum here with OPS. So, yeah, I just think that that's incredibly relevant, because while we are not going through something nearly as crazy as what Anne Frank was going through, her story is being told even now in 2020, okay? And our story can still be told way down the line when our kids or our grandkids are like, did this pandemic really happen, and what was that like? And we can sit back and we're like, well, let me tell you. And here I have journal entries from it, or here is a book that could be even being taught in schools one day from this class of creative writers who are living through an incredibly weird time that not everyone is going to have to go through one day. Work on those journal entries, get them turned into me. Shout out some ideas on what we can do with these to get them out, okay? Maybe we can edit them. Maybe you guys can start forming it into a manuscript. I don't know. Email me some ideas. Comment below with some ideas. This is your guys' opportunity. This is your guys' education. Tell me, what do you want to do with this? I'll be listening. Okay, so word study. This one's going to be pretty quick. I just have a few things that I want to bring up with you guys. First things first, our word of the week is rambunctious, okay? Rambunctious, it means uncontrollably exuberant or boisterous, which basically just means hyper, okay? Using it in a sentence. The word study students were rambunctious when they couldn't leave their house for 3 weeks. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. So, idea time. All right, idea time. What do you guys think about doing a theme for each set of words that I give you guys each week? So like, for example, that first week I gave you guys pandemic themed words. What if we did a different theme each week? Okay, and then maybe you guys can choose the themes. So comment below, tell me what you think about that. Tell me what ideas you guys have. Comment any themes that you might be interested in me exploring for our assignment for next week. Now what else? Our assignment, I gave you guys a vocabulary challenge. All right, that is straight out of a really good book that I have that's about expanding our vocabularies. So go through, work on those challenges. Each section has you do something a little bit different, like word sorting, or looking at certain words that we think come from, like, for example, our months that we think we know where those names came from, but turns out we don't. It does require a little bit of internet research, so use your phones, use something to get onto the internet and check that out, or just use a dictionary. You can find it in a dictionary as well. I told you it was short. Okay, moving on. Okay, my ACT preppers. So this week has been kind of another easy week for you guys. I gave you guys some practice tests to take on cracktheact.com. You guys have done that before. It's nothing new. So go through, take the different tests, see what your scores are, send me your scores. But I want you to go beyond that. I want you to look over on the side where it says giving the reasoning and it tells you why the answer is what it is. I want you to go through and read all of those, so you start to get into the mindset of like why the answer you chose was wrong and why the ACT would want to hear what the correct answer was, okay? That'll start to get you thinking about what the ACT is looking for again. And as you are actually taking the ACT or continuing through these practice tests, that you are going to start getting into the mindset, and then that will honestly help you answer some of the questions correctly more often. So start practicing on that. Now, I also included a link to an article that was about some study tips to take on the ACT, but literally the day after I posted the assignment, they took down the article, so it is no more. So for that section of our assignment where you have to read that article, it is no more. Don't do it. Just skip it and move on to the practice tests. Not a big deal. Okay, I guess ACT is going to be really short as well. So let's move on. All right, Junior English. So we have quite a bit to talk about, considering we are starting a new novel while we are all apart. Typically, I would say maybe let's just skip the last novel, but I couldn't, because our last novel is The Great Gatsby, and I've been talking to you guys about this novel unit all year long, so I feel like it just wouldn't be right if we skipped it. So let's talk about Gatsby.
Gatsby? What Gatsby?
Your assignment this week that was supposed to go with Gatsby was to read the first 2 chapters of The Great Gatsby or listen to it. I provided both an audiobook and a PDF version of the novel. However, also there was a really cool web, what would you call it, like treasure hunt, where you go through and you answer questions about all the background information about The Great Gatsby. So in this section, I'm going to cover some of that background information and then just go over the first 2 chapters with you and call your attention to some things that maybe you missed while you were reading or listening to the book. So let's begin. A major aspect of the 1920s was Prohibition. Prohibition came into effect on January 16th, 1919. Sorry, I had to look at that date. And essentially all Prohibition meant was that people were not allowed to drink alcohol in public or at all. It basically illegalized alcohol in the United States and made the United States a alcohol-free or dry country. It came into effect with the 18th Amendment, which lasted literally the entire of the 1920s and 3 years into the 1930s. Prohibition would eventually come to end on December 5th, 1933, when the 21st Amendment was basically repealed Prohibition, or the 18th Amendment. During this time, though, people still did indulge in alcohol. They just did it secretly in places called speakeasies. And speakeasies were basically bars that were hidden by legal businesses. So, for example, there could be a barber shop, and you go in and it looks like, yeah, cool, everyone's just getting a haircut. Then you go over against the wall where there's a picture, you knock 3 times or some special code, the picture would pop open, there'd be someone behind the picture, and then like a part of the wall would literally open up and you'd walk down into like a basement section where there was a bar, and people would just be down there doing what you do in a bar. Not that you guys know. Then the other portion of this was like, well, how did they get their alcohol if alcohol was banned? Bootleggers. Simple as that. People were making illegal alcohol secretly and selling it. And then they would sell it to, I guess, the people in the speakeasies and other people who were just indulging in it at home secretly. But they would sometimes actually create alcohol that is highly toxic, and people ended up dying from that, thus needing some sort of regulation, and honestly partially led to the end of Prohibition in 1933. In the 1920s, we did see a lot of people who were partying and just living their best life, and you'll notice that that is a major aspect as you're reading The Great Gatsby. A lot of our characters are truly just having a good time and not really caring about anything else in the world. The economy in the 1920s was just booming. After World War I, the economy continued to grow, and people honestly had extra money to spend, and it was just literally a party decade in America, okay? People would frivolously spend money on things that they don't need because they had it, okay? And they had no idea that the Great Depression was going to start in 1929. So yeah, at this point in time, they were truly just living their best lives. Women and men would go to parties together. Swing dancing was a huge thing. So, yeah, the 1920s, it was a wild time. And this is the time that our characters live in. And you'll see it reflected within each character, except for maybe one of them, that they truly don't think about much else than just having a grand old time. As per usual with any society, there are social expectations that were made for men and social expectations that were made for women. Simply put, men were considered number one in society, okay? They were the ones who went to work, they would bring home the money, and women had very few rights in terms of what they could do for work. Typically, if you saw a woman working, she was probably a secretary for some big hotshot boss who works in a corporation. So women, on the other hand, were the second-class citizens, and you kind of see that in The Great Gatsby. Women are starting to try and fight to have more power. And some of the women in The Great Gatsby are kind of just trying to deal with the society that they live in as a second-class citizen. So keep that in mind as we are reading through. Think about what is being expected of the men and the women in The Great Gatsby. One of the things that made the 1920s incredibly different was their fashion. For men, they would typically wear what could be like a three-piece suit with a nice tie at a very formal event. However, for maybe just a jaunt on the town, they could be wearing something like a nice casual suit with like a straw hat, or what was it they're called? Cardigans really came into play during casual settings, at least for the upper class. The lower class, it was a little bit different. They would wear maybe like a button-up shirt with trousers and an overalls. So for men, it was a very simple look until, at least for the lower class. Women, on the other hand, was incredibly different. The 1920s were a time of growth for women in terms of their freedoms. Typically, women started wearing shorter dresses, and I'm not talking about like the short dresses we see today. I'm talking about like dresses that went down to their calves, and even then, that was scandalous for them. So we also started to see an emergence of women, which you have heard of before, called flappers. And these women were women who would typically start to wear their hair really short. They would wear the dresses that we were just talking about. They'd go out and they would party at the bars, and typically engage in activities that at the time people saw to be revolutionary in a bad way, I guess. Their grandma and grandpas were like, ooh, little Sally's going out dancing at the pub, not a good thing. So comparatively speaking to what we are like today, the 1920s was rather calm, but for the time it was wild. Now that leads us into our author. Our author, F. Scott Fitzgerald, was alive and well during the 1920s, and he was a party animal. But it wasn't just him. His wife, Zelda, also was an incredible party animal, and they were considered to be like a power celebrity couple during the 1920s. You guys have actually heard of F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda before. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote the short story Winter Dreams. But remember Judy and Dexter and their rough relationship, and Judy was running around with like 20 different guys? Yeah, he wrote that story. And a lot of the times in F. Scott Fitzgerald's writings, you will see a reflection on his and Zelda's relationship, which also was really rough. They were extremely abusive to each other in many, many ways. However, people envied them and they loved them. So The Great Gatsby is also just kind of like F. Scott Fitzgerald's way of telling his story of things that are happening in his life. The Great Gatsby is literally inspired by F. Scott Fitzgerald's daily life and his life with Zelda. I think the first thing we need to do is we need to start to go over the different characters of The Great Gatsby. The first character you really need to know about is Nick Carraway. Now, Nick is not a rich man. He grew up in the Midwest, and kind of like in the area where we live in. Actually, I think he lived in Minnesota. But he went to World War I, and after World War I ended, he found himself needing more excitement in his life, more so than the Midwest could provide for him. So he uprooted his life and moved to the East Coast to pursue a job in stocks and bonds. And he was loving the fast pace of New York. However, he bought a little cottage on an area called West Egg. And to put this into perspective, it was like his little cottage was here, and it was a very, very rich neighborhood. So there was a gigantic house over here, little cottage here, gigantic house over here, okay? But I mean, that's all he could afford, and he was very happy with what he had. So keep that in mind, that Nick is just exploring a new time in his life. And Nick is one of our protagonists in our novel. It is told through his entire perspective, and we get to see his thoughts about what is going on throughout The Great Gatsby. So essentially, the entirety of The Great Gatsby takes place over one summer on the East Coast, specifically in an area called East and West Egg, which is like a neighborhood-ish area that's east of New York City. It also takes place in New York City, as well as an area called the Valley of the Ashes, which was just kind of like a connecting area between East and West Egg and New York City. So Nick was settling in very comfortably into his small cottage on West Egg, and he learns that his cousin Daisy Buchanan and her husband Tom Buchanan live across this bay in an area called East Egg. Okay, so think of it as two, like, I guess kind of peninsula type things that are in the shape of eggs with a body of water in between them. And so he goes over to East Egg to visit his cousin Daisy. Now there's some major differences you need to know between East Egg and West Egg. West Egg is symbolic for what's called new money. All right, and that just means that the people who live in West Egg are people who have not had money their entire life. They were not born into wealth, and they act massively different from those who live on the East Egg, who were born with all of this wealth. Essentially, the people in West Egg, they like to party, they like to drink, they like to do drugs, they hold social events all the time, and that was just normal for them. They would flaunt their money around because they could. All right, on East Egg, it's a little bit different. They knew the expectations of what it was like to be rich. They knew what they had to act like. They knew what was expected of them. And so they were very prim and proper. And let's sip some tea. Actually, I really needed a drink. And so even the structures of their houses were different between East and West Egg. West Egg, you'd see these huge mansions with tons of fountains, and it was very show-offy, I guess, for lack of a better word. And so that is the type of thing that Nick sees around him all the time. West Egg, on the other hand, East Egg, on the other hand, would have grand mansions as well, but they looked like old man mansions, like pillars and red bricks and very fancy schmancy, like you take your shoes off when you first walk in, kind of fancy schmancy. And that's where Daisy lived, and that's where Nick was going. So as Nick arrives, he meets and sees Tom Buchanan for the first time, and Tom is like, he's kind of like a big football player guy. He's an athlete. He definitely thinks very highly of himself, and he just thinks that he's the coolest thing in the history of the world. He's a big, brawn guy, like the kind of guy where you'd punch him and it feels like you're punching a wall. So you wouldn't really want to mess with him. Luckily, he and Nick went to college together, so they're kind of friends in terms of how they know each other. So Tom takes him inside, and he sees Daisy for the first time, and Daisy is like the golden girl of the 1920s. She's the Zelda. Daisy, I guess the best way to say her, she's kind of a dreamer. She definitely lets her head float off, and she doesn't think about, like, I guess, repercussions of things. So she's the type of person where she'd be like, oh, on the whim, let's go into New York City and throw a nice little party for just some people to get together, you know? And it could be 7 o'clock at night. She's like, let's go to the city. Let's go to the city. She liked to live adventurously. Now, the thing that you need to know about Daisy and Tom is that they're a little bit racist, okay? And the 1920s were big about this. The African Americans were starting to have a voice and come into power during this time. And Tom, in particular, actually, did not like that. And he felt like colored people needed to be kept down, okay? Daisy, I don't fully believe, thinks that as well. I think that because she lives in this time when men were dominant, that she just followed suit with him, okay? Because it says in the book that he reads big words with barely any pictures, and Daisy literally rolls her eyes, okay? So she's not happy with Tom, I don't think anyway. I don't think she likes him at all. Now, there's one other person who's in the room with them, and her name is Jordan Baker. So Jordan Baker is a very tall woman, very proper. She would be the type who would wear like kind of I guess like a one-piece tracksuit, kind of like maybe a pantsuit or something like that, which was just wild for the 1920s. Women did not wear pants in the 1920s. And so Nick is automatically attracted to her when he sees her. And they kind of have a little bit of a fling throughout the book. And I'm not going to tell you where that goes, but we'll have to see as we continue reading. So Nick, Daisy, Tom, and Jordan are all sitting in kind of like a living room type area, and they're just talking. They're not getting to know each other, but they're catching up with one another. And the conversation comes up about where Nick lives, and Tom was all like, "Oh, Nick, you don't associate with all those new money types, do you?" And Daisy's like, "Oh, I love where you live. I think it's so cute." And Jordan's all like, "Oh, I know someone on West Egg." And Nick is all like, "Well, I don't know anyone. I just moved there." And Jordan's all like,
You must know Gatsby.
and automatically Daisy has the strangest, I guess, reaction to it. She's all like, stops everything, and she's like,
Gatsby? What Gatsby?
and she's like entranced by that name, which is just strange because we hadn't heard that name before. So we don't know what the significance of that is yet. We will learn, but it's just strange that suddenly Daisy, who without a care in the world is just entranced by this name that she supposedly had never heard before anyway. So all four of them sit down to dinner, and they're enjoying a nice meal, probably a very fancy meal. And a strange thing keeps happening while they're eating. The telephone keeps ringing. And I'm not saying just once, it's like over and over and over and over again. And finally Tom gets sick of it, and he stands up, he goes to answer the phone, and Daisy just looks perplexed. She's annoyed, but she won't show it, and she gets up and follows him out. And so then suddenly Jordan's like, ooh, you know, what tea is happening? And Nick isn't knowing what's going on, so he tries to talk to Jordan. Jordan's like, shh, stop, like, I'm trying to listen. And he's like, well, what's going on? And we find out that Tom is having an affair with some other woman, and Daisy probably knows about it, but this woman keeps calling their house, especially when they're sitting at dinner, because she wants to talk to Tom. And Jordan's like, well, don't you think she would know not to call it dinner anyway? So I want to show you guys this next scene because I think it's rather interesting and kind of gives you an idea of how or what type of state Daisy is in as we continue on through this story. Give it a watch.
Everything's terrible anyhow.
Really?
Yes. I've been everywhere and seen everything and done everything. I've had a very bad time, Nikki. I'm pretty cynical about everything.
Your daughter, I suppose she talks and eats and everything?
Pammy? Oh, yes. Listen, Nick. When she was born, Tom was God knows where. With God knows who. And I asked the nurse if it was a boy or a girl. And she said it was a girl. And I wept. I'm glad it's a girl. And I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl in this world can be. A beautiful little fool.
Isn't that interesting? So that takes place directly after dinner. And I just want to reiterate what it says here. I'm going to read it from my copy of the book. It says, Daisy says, it'll show you how I've gotten to feel about things. Well, she was less than an hour old, and Tom was God knows where. They're talking about the day of the birth of her daughter. I woke up out of the ether, and with an utterly abandoned feeling, I asked the nurse right away if it was a boy or a girl. She told me it was a girl, and so I turned my head away and wept. All right, I said. I'm glad it's a girl, and I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world. A beautiful little fool. So what does that mean? Why is it that the best thing a woman can be in this world is a beautiful little fool? Well, you have to keep in mind that at this time, men and women were not considered equals. So a woman who is acting like a fool could probably attract a man who could then take care of her. And I think that that is flipped in our society today. Maybe not even flipped. Maybe, I don't think that at this point in time, women believe that being a fool is the best way. I think women are making their own way amazingly nowadays. But at that point in time, that's how Daisy felt that she could survive. And so she wanted to have a girl. She wanted a girl who could act like a fool and then get taken care of and thus survive. Now, long story short, Nick goes home and he sees a mysterious man standing on the end of his dock, which we can only assume to be Gatsby. However, when we get into chapter 2, we see Nick, and he's on his way to work in New York. He's taking the train, and he's with Tom, and Tom pulls him off the train in this place called the Valley of Ashes. And they go over to this little gas station / garage, and they meet Myrtle Wilson. And Myrtle Wilson is not rich. She is not well off, okay? She's married to a guy who owns this gas station, and she's not happy. She lives in the Valley of Ashes. She doesn't have clear air wherever she's at. She doesn't have a nice big lawn. She literally has a garage and then maybe like gravel, okay? Like that's it. And then they live up on top of the garage. However, Myrtle has one thing. She has Tom. Okay, she's Tom's mistress, and he wants to give her all these nice things because Tom really likes her. Okay, maybe a little bit more than he should. So Tom and Myrtle and Nick go into New York City, and Tom has an apartment where he takes Myrtle, and it's their apartment. And Myrtle gets him to get a dog, and she invites all these people over, and she's like, "Let's have a party." Here's another clip from The Great Gatsby to kind of get an idea of what this party was like. It was wild, but it was small. Take a look.
I had been drunk just twice in my life. And the second time was that afternoon.
Enough of that. So one thing that you need to know that happens that brings this party to a screeching halt is they're drunk. They're not thinking. And Myrtle and Tom get into a little argument while Nick is sitting back and he's like out of it and everyone else is out of it. And they're sitting there, they're fighting. And Nick soon comes to realize that it's Myrtle, and she won't stop saying Daisy's name. And Tom's like, "Stop saying her name. You cannot say her name." And Myrtle's like, "Daisy, Daisy, Daisy." And then he smacks her across the face. He literally, breaks her nose. She's bleeding down her face. Why? Obviously, Tom still loves Daisy. I think he sees Daisy as what's right with his world, and he sees Myrtle as what's wrong with his world. So automatically, Daisy's, up here with him, and Myrtle's right here. He doesn't care as much about Myrtle as he does about Daisy. And so that's why he gets super offended when she's saying Daisy's name. He doesn't want them to clash or that world to come together, okay? And that's literally where chapter 2 ends. Nick says that he doesn't remember much. He just remembers being within and without. And I want you to remember that as we continue reading. Nick is always within and without. He was within every situation, but he felt like he was watching it from an outsider perspective, which gives him a whole other idea of what was really going on, which is what he's trying to tell us. It's an interesting 2 chapters, and at this point in time, we haven't even met Gatsby yet, right? So keep that in mind. We have not met one of the major characters yet, and probably arguably one of the most important characters in this entire novel. But so far, we already have a wild affair going on. And I'm talking about, this should not be happening, okay? Amongst the rich, that is scandalous. And people don't get divorced at this time. It's just unheard of. So, they're trapped with each other right now, and they're having an affair with each other. Well, I mean, affairs are happening, you know? So it's like, whoa, F. Scott Fitzgerald, it's only been 2 chapters. What are you doing? Well, you're gonna have to wait till next week to find out. Haha. My English kids, I hope that helped you guys a little bit with your reading or your listening with the Great Gatsby chapter 1 and 2. Continue to work on that scavenger hunt throughout the internet assignment and get that reading done. I'm trying to figure out a way how we can all watch the movie. Bear with me on that. I'm just going to be adding some clips in here, but I hope I can find a way to where I can let you guys see the movie in its entirety, because it is worth watching. You know, I was actually really lucky that I was able to get my copy of The Great Gatsby. I had to go up to Northwest to get it. Yeah, here's some footage from that video, first of all.
Oh.
This is so... Hey! Would you ever do that?
This is my crib.
Here we go. Alright, here we are, 2:36, all lit up. Still got our Valentine's Day stuff up. Still got everything. Still. I think that's all I have for you guys today. Yeah, so do me a favor. Go ahead and give this video a like and a subscribe. Share it out with all of your friends. I guess, I mean, you really don't have to with this one because it's more instruction based. What else? Follow me on Twitter. Send me emails if you have any questions. Subscribe to my channel because there are going to be some more videos to come. You're not going to want to miss any of this Great Gatsby goodness. I think that's about it. Look at my dog. All right, come on. Here we go. Come on, Daisy. Come on, girl. Go, girl. Whee! You dork.